games is really shaping.
That raises a question that's been around since the 1980s. Are violent video games creating new school shooters? Let's talk about that. With me now is Dr. Jeff Gardere, a clinical psychiatrist, and Patrick Markey, a psychology professor at Villanova University, who wrote the book Moral Combat and has extensively studied if there is a link between these violent video games and real violence, as in mass shootings in our schools. So I'm going to start with you, Patrick. In your research, did you find there is a direct link between violent video games and mass shooters?
Yeah, I don't know who the president is talking to about there being a link, but it certainly wasn't scientists. That the one thing that we find pretty clearly is when we actually look at school shooters, and this is research that we've done, the United States Secret Service has done, is that school shooters actually on average play less violent video games than the average high school student. We actually find about 20% of school shooters have interest in violent video games, whereas if you go into the average high school classroom, it's closer to 70%.
But what about Adam Lanza, you know, the school shooter
you well, one of...
Go ahead.
Certainly, yeah. Adam Lanza definitely played Call of Duty, and it was a very popular game. But one of the interesting things about this case is one of the things that we found out is the video game that he played the most leading up to the killing, and we know this by tracking his GPS in his car, was Dance Dance Revolution. He kept going to a movie theater and playing Dance Dance Revolution over and over. We also know from interviews with his friends that his favorite video game was Super Mario Brothers. So yeah, he played Call of Duty, but it certainly was not the game that he obsessed about. And again, the games that he did obsess about are not games we typically link to violent school shootings.
Interesting. So Dr. Jeff, why is this brought up every time there is a mass shooting, that these violent video games are creating mass shooters?
Well, obviously, I think this is certainly a way to pull away from responsibility of passing laws that have to do with sensible gun control, as well as passing legislation to put more money into mental health budgets so that we can have more hospital beds for people, especially young people, who have mental health challenges and mental health issues. And Patrick is absolutely correct. The direct, if you would say, correlation between playing video games and being a school shooter has not been found. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics stated that there was a link between some aggressive behaviors, but still you have to, and video games, but still you have to look at almost 97% of kids ages 12 to 18 are playing video games. Many of them are playing violent video games, but we don't see the statistics showing that they become school shooters.
Right. So I'm just going to push back a little bit, Patrick, because, you know, I like to play devil's advocate. It's my job. So I wanted to bring up the example of ISIS videos online, because they definitely inspire young people to violence and to extremism. So how do they differ from playing violent video games? Because you're watching extreme violence, but one's real and one's not.
Well, I think you nailed it right there. I mean, I think there's a big difference between somebody being inspired from, say, a religious argument to commit horrific acts versus a person playing a video game that's somehow going to reprogram them and cause them to do these horrific acts. I mean, this is why the American Psychological Association actually did come out and say that, yes, there's a link between violent video games and very mundane acts of aggression, but they explicitly say that there's no evidence to suggest there's a link between violent video games and real acts of violence like school shootings. So again, perhaps, you know, not saying that media can't influence people at all, but it's simply that video games don't appear to influence individuals to commit these horrific acts.
And you know, if you're going to take into account video games, right, then you have to take into account everything. Violent movies. Like when I was a kid, I watched Bonanza. Yeah. There was violence in Bonanza, right? Because they shot people, even though you didn't see spurting blood. They did. We live in a country where we see those images all the time since the beginning of time, and yet we're not largely a nation of killers, right, Dr. Jeff?
Well, absolutely, and we have to look at what all of the particular influences are, not just looking at violent video games or violent films, but what is the diet that our children are getting with regard to what it is that they are seeing. One of the things that the American Psychological Association says, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics, and something I think we can all hang our hats on, let's be involved in what it is that our children are watching. Let's be involved in limiting the number of violent video games and introducing other types of media influences that will enrich their hearts and their minds. And I think that is something that is just common sense and what we need to do.
Right.
I think it's important.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, I think it's important to point out that certainly it's important to limit. There's lots of reasons why we restrict children from playing violent video games, bad dreams, all kinds of perhaps a moral issue. But it's a different question to ask, are they actually causing children to become killers? And so certainly limiting is a good thing. In my own home with my children, we don't play violent video games. But it's not because I'm scared they're going to become killers. It's simply as a parent, it's my job to sometimes protect them from violent imagery.
Right. And so just my last thought, and I'll pose this to you, Patrick, since you've researched this topic so thoroughly. I think that we always talk about violent video games, and we have since the 1980s into the 1990s. We bring it up every single time there's a mass shooting. And I think we do because it's easy. Wouldn't it be easy if we just eliminated violent video games and that would solve our problem? But that's not the ticket, right?
Yeah, I mean, it gives people a sense of control. That does seem like the easy way out. But you're absolutely right. From all the research we have, it wouldn't do anything at all if we eliminate them as far as school shootings or anything along those lines. And as was suggested before, what this actually ends up doing is it ends up becoming a distraction from the real issues that are to protect our children. I mean, quite frankly, it's a waste of time, and this is my research. We don't need any more money to research this. We understand it enough that now we need to move on to things that are really going to protect our kids, and it's not, protecting them from Pac-Man or Call of Duty.
Dr. Jeff Gardere, Patrick Markey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As the East Coast deals with a nasty winter storm, a second nor'easter